Well. Hello, everybody. Happy, marvelous Monday. I am super excited that you are joining me today. And I want to first and foremost say thank you to all of you who took time out to wish me a very happy and blessed birthday. I'm excited to join you today on this Monday as we are talking about resolving tenant disputes. This is for landlords. This is for property managers on today. Usually on Mondays, I'm sharing information for landlords as well as tenants, but today is all about property managers and owners. Before I get started, again, thank you. Welcome. I see you coming in on the YouTube channel. I'm also live on Facebook and I'm live on LinkedIn. So thank you. Welcome. I'm going to share a lot of information today. So please make sure that you're taking notes. Please make sure that if you have questions that you drop it in the comment section. I want to make sure that the information that I am providing today is relevant and it is understandable. I do hope that something I share will add value to what you're currently doing, or perhaps is going to change some of your business practices. I do also want to share that information that I'm providing on my platforms is not legal advice. However, I typically share the tips and practices that are currently being used in the industry. So again, thank you so much. Please let me know where you are tuned in from. Show me some love in the comment section. If you have questions, comments, remarks, or observations, please don't be afraid. Drop it in the comment section on today. And for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you so much. I'm going to get straight into it because I have a lot to cover today. And if you tuned in last week, I think that there were a lot of good nuggets and takeaways from last week. So this is part 2. And so today's segment is all about resolving landlord and tenant disputes without stress. Okay. And for many of you who are in property management, you already know that sometimes you will and have likely faced tenants who have paid rent either late, or perhaps there have been some sort of lease violations, right? Or perhaps there were some sort of maybe maintenance disagreements. And you know how stressful some of these disputes can be, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. So that's why we're having this segment, this conversation today, because I want you to know that there is a way to resolve it without headaches and without stress. And so as I'm going through this information today, I'm asking for those of you who are landlords or property managers to drop whatever your biggest tenant dispute has been since you have been in this industry. I want to make sure that I address that live. Okay, so I know that many of you this will resonate with many of you. And I'm just talking about the top disputes that many of you as landlords and property managers, you've gone through and you have experienced. Some of the most common issues start with number 1, late rent payments. How many of you know that sometimes tenants, while they may mean well, sometimes it just doesn't always happen that way where the tenants pay their rent on time. I know that that is a big issue. That's a common issue. But here's the thing. Whether you have been managing property, whether you've owned property for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, or decades, right? At some point, you will likely have tenants who will pay their rent late. Another big issue is lease violations, such as unauthorized guests, or maybe you have a pet-free rental property and you show up only to find out that your tenant has not only 1 dog, not 2 dogs, but maybe 3, 4, or 5 dogs, right? That's a big issue. And I know that sometimes when it comes to rental property, those maintenance repairs and complaints, that is a big issue. Who's responsible? How long has the water been leaking? How long have the tenants been in some sort of physical altercation in the property and physically damaged the property? True story. A rental community I was managing, I believe it was approximately 372 doors. Many of you, you've been watching me, you know that I'm big on inspections, right? And so I went to the property to do an inspection shortly after taking over management of that community to find that in one tenant's apartment, the complaint originally came in indicating that the tenant's balcony door was off. They couldn't get it back on. I took the crew with me. We inspected the property, the entire property. That's just what I do. So in other words, when a tenant complained, I'm not going to just make sure that that issue is resolved, but I'm going to do an assessment to see if there are any other things that we need to be on the lookout for, or if there are repairs, um, replacements or renovations that need to be made. I want to make sure that I assess it while I'm on the scene. So anyway, we went there. The tenant's balcony door, it was not just off the track. The whole frame was damaged. So we had to replace that entire frame along with that glass door. That was a very costly repair. And so I know that sometimes things happen when it comes to maintenance, and there are a lot of disputes. Okay, who's responsible? Is it the tenant's responsibility? Is it your responsibility? Another big issue or concern is the security deposit. There are a lot of security deposit disputes when tenants don't receive their security deposit, or maybe they don't receive it on time, or perhaps maybe they do receive the security deposit, but they have not been given advance notice as to why they're not receiving the full amount. And those are just some of the top common complaints when it comes to disputes and issues that landlords and tenants are battling and bickering over. All right. Many of you know I've been in the industry for quite some time. I am not surprised by these issues. Now, of course, like I said, if you have an issue as a property manager or a landlord, drop whatever your biggest dispute has been so far. All right. But here's the thing. I want you to know and understand um, why it is so important to resolve these issues quickly, because the thing that you don't want to happen is having a legal battle over this. You definitely want to avoid that at all costs. And so that's why you have to have strategies in place, because let me tell you, if you have not already experienced this, going through the legal route, I promise that can be a costly and time consuming process. Having to take a tenant to court, pay the court fee. If you have to pay an attorney costs, right? And so you want to have strategies in place that will help minimize and offset going down that rabbit hole. You also want to understand the importance of maintaining, hear me when I say this, the importance of maintaining positive and healthy tenant relationships. I promise that will go a long way. All right. You want to definitely make sure. Now, I know that sometimes that's just not humanly possible. I get it. I've managed over 12,000 doors in my career. And I understand that some tenants, they'll be perfect. They'll may not be perfect, but they'll be close to being perfect. You can have some good tenants, but then you can have some tenants that are not so great. Okay. But as much as possible, you always want to understand that this rental property is part of a business. And it doesn't matter if it's one single family home, one condo, one apartment, or a large community. It could be a multi-family community. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it is a rental property business, and you want to protect your cash flow or the owner's cash flow, and you want to protect the property because it is an asset. All right, so I know that I'm moving pretty quickly. And again, if you have comments, please drop it in the comment section. Thank you so much for tuning in. I see that you're coming in on a YouTube channel. All right, so one of the things that I shared last week was the importance of having a clear lease agreement. You want to, I promise, you want to always make sure that your rental leases, your lease agreement is clear, is precise, is concise. You want to set expectations early and upfront. You want to be as detailed as possible. We're in the beginning of 2025. We're in the second month of the year. A lot of tenants will be looking to move this year. They're going to be looking for new places to move into. They're going to be looking for many of you as a new potential landlord. And so you want to set a clear expectation up front. Always, I promise that when you encourage effective communication on the front end, it can minimize a lot of these issues on the back end. When you set that clear expectation, when you have those honest and upfront communications, you want to make sure that even after the tenant moves in, or maybe it's a current tenant, you want to have a regular check-in and have an open dialogue with your tenants to prevent misunderstandings. Sometimes tenants just want to know that you care. Sometimes tenants just want to know that you're actually going to do what you promised you're going to do. So if you told your tenant that you're going to come back, or you're going to send someone from maintenance or a contractor to follow up on a complaint because of a leaky faucet or a pipe dripping or a garbage disposal that's not working, a sink that's backed up or whatever. If you have promised your tenant you're going to do something, please make sure that you are definitely doing that. And if you're not able to, then at the very least, just follow to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I know we said that a contractor is coming tomorrow. They had an emergency. They're not able to come back today. Is it possible to reschedule it for another time? And you encourage that feedback. Enroll the tenant to say, okay, well, yes, they can come back, and ask them, okay, based on the schedule, these are days that the contractor is available to return. Will one of these days work best for you? Versus just telling a tenant, and I know that some of you may not agree with me, and that's fine, versus just telling a tenant, oh, well, we're going to come out, or we're going to send someone out on tomorrow or next Tuesday. Yeah, you can tell them, but I promise that the communication may be a lot better if you enroll them in that conversation and let them feel like they're valuable and important, because that relationship, it can be very good or it can be very bad. And so you have to pick and choose your battles. Sometimes just engaging in that open dialogue will minimize a lot of disputes. And for me, I can honestly say that one of the things that I do value is communicating with my tenants. I've always done that down through the years, having those honest and upfront communications. And if it's something, for instance, I was not able to do, or I was not able to fulfill something that I said I was going to do, at the very least, I apologize. Now, let me just take a step back, because it was some years ago. I think this was in 2020. My father passed away, and I made the terrible mistake by not taking off. I should have taken off. So my father passed away, and I went to work the next day, right? I was not in the right frame of mind, okay? Just having lost my father. And I was in the office. When I walked in, there was a tenant who was engaged in a conversation with one of my assistant property managers. And not even thinking, I just jumped into the conversation without really understanding the backdrop. All I knew and heard was the tenant was rude. She was abrupt to my assistant manager. And so I immediately jumped in. And as professional, as polite as I usually am, that was the one time where my conversation and my communication with the tenant was very abrupt. It was very harsh, and the tenant did not deserve it. And so I had to go back and apologize to the tenant. And I did, share with her that although, I had no right to talk to her in that manner, I did express that my father had passed away. But here's what I do want you to understand, and why it is so important to maintain a level of professionalism at all times. Number one, you are the professional. And the one thing that we can never do is take back what we say to someone. We can no longer take back how we make a person feel. And so when you have these open and honest conversations, if it's something that you're responsible for, be accountable. Hey, listen, I apologize. I said that. or what I really meant was this, or maybe we did not satisfy you by making the repairs as we promised. I may go into explain the situation, and then also I'm going to follow up. Okay, well, that's the situation. So let's discuss when we can work to resolve this issue for you. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that your home is decent, safe, and sanitary. We always want to value tenants because they don't have to be there. And I promise that a vacant apartment, a vacant condo, a vacant house, or whatever category the rental property is, I promise you that bricks and mortars or vacant rentals, vacant units will never put money in the bank. So it's always good to show how much you appreciate tenants. It's always good to show that you value them and are engaging them in that open and honest conversation. So that dialogue will go a long way. You also want to make sure, and this is something that I'm big on. I know that many of you have heard me talk about this before. Always keep good records. So you want to have written documentation of everything, not just the lease, but the conversations, any maintenance requests. Last week, I touched on the importance of using technology. Whatever property management software that you're using, capitalize off of what is available. Make what you do a lot easier. It's going to help you if you have, for instance, if you have a property management software in place that you're using, and let's say the software has a way for you to create a tenant portal, or perhaps that's a feature of that property management software. It should allow what you do to be a whole lot easier because you can engage with the tenants on that platform. You can respond to tenants quicker, as well as see their maintenance requests and close out work order tickets. You also want to make sure that when it comes to move-ins, that you do a pre-move-in walkthrough. You want to document the condition of their rental property, because at the end of the day, you always want to prevent a security deposit dispute. And I know that and on the beginning of it, with the tenant moving in on the front end, that's not something that you have in your mind, but I want you to think about it. I want you to think about the end. Even when the tenant moves in, you want to set the expectation. You want to make sure that you are conducting that pre-move-in inspection so that you can identify the condition of that rental property. Because if, let's say, you don't do it, the tenant moves in, you didn't know that there was a huge hole under the kitchen sink or under that bathroom sink. And let's say the tenant lives there for 2, 3, 4 years. Nobody ever identified or pointed out that there was this huge hole. So let's say the tenant gets a new job and has to relocate. You go in after the tenant moves out, you see this big hole, and now you want to charge the tenant. And the tenant says, screw you, that was there when I first moved in, right? So you can see how this can create issues when you're not doing those pre-move-in inspections. That's going to be so important. Now, I want to pause because and thank you so much for the shares. I thank you for sharing it. I want to pause because now I'm going to go into another section or another segment that I want you to take a lot of good notes on, because this is now getting into how you handle disputes without stress, but you do it in a way that you're not worried about maintenance repairs, right? You're not worried about those things, but here's what you are in control of, because what we can do is focus on the things that we have control over. Don't focus on or get bent out of shape or wear your feelings on your sleeve because a tenant doesn't respect you, or maybe they don't respect the property. But here are things that we can control. Number one, we can always stay professional and neutral. We don't have to respond, and it's never a good idea. I would never suggest to get into an argument or a heated debate or battle because of some sort of dispute. Remember a few minutes ago, I said that we're professionals and we should always be professionals, right? And it doesn't matter what the tenant says, unless, let me just pause here, unless you feel like your life is in danger or you have been threatened, right? But some sort of altercation, a verbal altercation, you don't have to do it. Remain positive, remain neutral. And if you feel like it, if you realize it is getting out of hand, and I've had some situations where things definitely got out of hand very fast. But even in that, I handled it in a professional way. So, what I'm saying to you is, and sometimes just depending on your rental property, depending on the mindset of your tenants, you may have someone such as this young lady I'm getting ready to tell you about. I had a tenant who came into the office, and she was suffering from some sort of mental health issue. We did not know it at the time. All I knew is I was in my office, I heard my staff yelling and screaming. So I came out to ascertain the issue, to see what the problem was. And the tenant was upset. She was so upset. She literally took her hand and just went just like this. And everything on the desk, including the computer, ended up on the floor because we sent her a letter indicating that she owed some rent payments plus late fees. All right. Now, when you have those situations, you can't control a tenant's mindset. You cannot control their behavior. I tried to de-escalate the situation. The tenant was just flat out not having it. She didn't care who I was. She didn't care who was in the office. And so in a situation like that, we just had to call the police, wait for the police to come and take care of the situation like that. But it wasn't it just wasn't in my advantage to have some sort of argument with this young lady, because clearly anything that I said escalated the situation. And so I just kind of disengaged. I just kind of pulled back. I told my staff, it's okay. It's okay. Now they were upset because she was in their face and she was yelling, she was cussing, she was making threats, and they wanted to return that same energy. And I had to remind them, listen, we're professional. Let's take a step back. Unless, like I said, you feel threatened, unless someone put their hand on you, just take a step back. Take a neutral position where possible. If you have to call authorities or call a caseworker or a case manager or someone to assist, that's fine. But at the end of the day, we are always the professionals, okay? You always want to make sure that you are listening and acknowledging what a tenant says. I've seen so many property managers make a mistake of being rude to tenants, having a very nasty attitude, very poor attitude because a tenant has a complaint. Well, perhaps if some property managers do their job in a professional way and they make sure repairs are completed, then tenants won't have to act out like that, right? So think of it from what I want people to do is, if any of you are experiencing tenants who are acting out, they're upset, they're angry, they're cussing, they're fussing, they're yelling, take a step back and ask, is it possible that perhaps their repairs have not been completed? Is it possible, and perhaps maybe they deserve, they should act like that? Also, take an assessment. How would I feel if I was in this tenant's position and my repairs were not completed, right? And so you want to listen with the intent to hear and acknowledge the tenant's complaint. Make the tenants feel like they're heard, because in many cases, this will definitely de-escalate any tension. You want to propose solutions, offer compromises. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I apologize. We did not fix your refrigerator. We know that you've had this complaint that your refrigerator has been making noise. And we apologize, but can we offer you a concession? We give you $25 off your rent, or we give you a $25 gift certificate, a $25 Visa or Amazon gift certificate, or whatever you come up with, right? Offer some sort of compromise, offer some sort of incentive to de-escalate those situations. And then you also have to understand when it's important to get a mediator involved, because in many cases, you may not be able to resolve tenants' issues. especially if the situation is heightened. Because here's the thing, if your direct negotiation fails, something has to work. And so you should consider getting professional mediator. Maybe you're not the person that can resolve it, and it's okay. We can't resolve everybody's issue, and it is okay. But at some level, it can be resolved with someone. And so maybe if it's not you, consider somebody else. Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, I apologize. I try to resolve the issue. I understand that your refrigerator is making noise and it's been like this, and the part is on back order. And I know that you've been waiting for about 7 days now. I do apologize. I'm not able to resolve this issue today. Is it possible that I can get Jill or Billy, whoever, to assist you with this matter, because we want to get this resolved for you? You see how that is? Like, you don't want to ignore tenants. You don't want to aggravate tenants, and you want to recognize when enough is enough. Like, okay, clearly I'm not the person that can resolve this issue. And here's something that I have done, right? So as a property manager, as a property management educator, sometimes I've taken a step back and just let my staff jump in, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what my title is. It doesn't matter what my role or my position is. Even the CEO doesn't matter. What matters is we get these results for the tenants that they deserve and need. And so if it's not me, and if it's a staff member or whoever else, then I'm okay to take a step back, because at the end of the day, I want the issue to be done and over with. I want it to be resolved. All right. You also want to explore legal options, because sometimes it may be necessary to evict the tenant or to take legal action. Now, one of the biggest things for me earlier in my earlier years, rather, when I started managing property, was evicting tenants. My first eviction was a young mother who had kids. So we went to the property. I went with the U.S. Marshals and had to evict this young lady who had kids. And when I saw the Marshals put the kids' toys outside, it crushed my heart, because all I could think about was the kids coming back and seeing their things outside, and how heartbreaking that could be. But unfortunately, and sometimes that is something that may be necessary for many of you. You have gone through the eviction process. You understand what it's like. Others have never experienced it. It's part of the job for many. And you have to know and understand when it is definitely necessary. I get calls, I get emails, and I have conversations quite frequently with colleagues and clients of mine who have to go through the eviction process, but they would rather not do it. They would just prefer that the tenant act right, so that they don't have to go through the court process. And it's not even about the money. It's just that some of you don't want to have to take tenants to court. You don't want to have to evict them. And many have opted not to go to court, and they allow the behavior to linger on a little or a lot longer than it should have. And the behavior never changed. But you have to understand that when it is necessary, you have to do what you have to do, because it is a business. All right, so I have shared a lot so far. I do want to pause. I see some comments coming in. Thank you so much, Preacher. You are from Florida, but you invest in Alabama. I'm curious to hear some of the things that you have gone through in Alabama with your tenants. You said, what could you do when your property manager can't seem to resolve the problem professionally? They are a little mean. Well, great question. Here's what I would say about that. If you have a property manager and they are rude, they're not professional, they're not effective, first and foremost, have a conversation with them. Let them know if you receive lots of complaints that you want to address some things that have been brought to your attention. You want to give them an opportunity, number one, to be aware of the concern. You want to give them an opportunity to correct their behavior. And then if it continues, to have another conversation. Hey, listen, we've spoken before, and Miss Sally in apartment 3 or unit whatever, she's had some complaints, and I know we've addressed this a little earlier, but it's come up again. And so we want to find out, is there anything that you need from us so that this issue could be resolved? Because now I do know that some property managers are mean and nasty. I get it. Then I also know, here's what I do know, preacher. I do know that sometimes tenants will take things personally, right? And give the appearance that someone is being mean or rude or harsh. Now, this could go either way. It could be your property manager, it could be the tenant. But if you have multiple complaints, then perhaps there's really a bigger issue there. And so if after you've had these conversations, you've given your property manager time and several chances to completely turn around that behavior, and if they absolutely do not do it, then maybe consider letting them know, you know what, maybe this is not working out for us. Because here's what you don't want to happen. You do not want your tenant to have such an issue with your property manager, whereas now they begin to not pay their rent, or they destroy the property, or they're telling everybody, you know what, don't rent here, don't live here. My property manager is the worst. The owner doesn't do anything. Because at the end of the day, it's a representation of you and your rental property business. So I can appreciate that question. Thank you for that. My tenants keep the laundry room dirty. It's all of them. I saw all of them on video. Wow. Now, the one question that I do have for you is, when you see it on video, do you follow up with your tenants? Do you send your tenant a copy of that video? Like, do a little clip, send it to them, let them know, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, there's a violation. And especially if you do have it in writing, send them a letter, or have your property manager to send a letter letting them know that there's a violation. And if it continues, that perhaps they're going to be served with a notice to vacate because of the violations. Listen, one of the things that I do recommend and encourage is that you use whatever evidence you have. So if you have it on camera, make sure that you keep it. If you have a system where maybe, let's say, the footage is erased after like 30 days, just make sure that you have some sort of way to keep it, because you may need it a little bit later. But I would definitely follow up, or have your property manager to follow up when you do catch those things on camera. And that's good footage. If you see it, but it's not enough to just see it, you have to act on it. All right. So thank you for your comments and your questions. I have a few more items I do want to share on today. So one of the things that I also want to encourage is that if you're having issues with your tenants, I've already talked about the open dialogue and having those honest and upfront communications. I talked about being accountable and responsible, right? And so, preacher, let me go back to you with your property manager. Now, if you are in a situation where your tenants are communicating, or they contact you to complain about your property manager, always admit it, explain it, and then resolve it. So admit that, okay, we do have a problem here, and this is not the best. This is not a true representation of who we are and our business practices. So that's admitting that there's an issue. You want to explain that you will look into it. You value them as a tenant, and now you're moving on to resolving it. You're going to have a conversation to make sure that this is not an issue. Sometimes tenants, like I said, they just want you to listen, and they want you to acknowledge it. All right. So I did share a lot today. I do have quite a bit to share, but maybe I'll come back next week, because I want to be respectful of everybody's time on today. All right. And so I see a question here. What's the best way to handle noise complaints from other tenants? Great question. So when you have a tenant who is constantly, for instance, playing loud music, or maybe there are loud altercations, there's loud arguing going on in the apartment or the rental home, one of the things that I will always do is reach out to the tenant, and I'll check in first. Hey, Mrs. Tenant or Mr. Tenant, how are you? How are things going? I'm going to let them know that we did receive a complaint, a noise complaint, and we wanted to check in with them first to see if they were aware of the noise complaint. Now, what I'm not going to do is automatically assume that they are responsible. I'm not going to go in judging. I'm not going to go in. We received the complaint that there's a lot of noise going on. If you don't take care of it, we're going to evict you. I'm not going in with a hammer. Okay. When I first get that complaint, I'm going to let them know we received a complaint. I want to encourage them to give me their feedback. Here's why that's important. I had a tenant who moved in, and she moved in. The tenant above her was was a single father. He was going through divorce. He did have two sons who came over bi-weekly. So every 2 weeks, his sons would come over. It was a one-bedroom apartment. And so what he would do is allow the boys to run around and play, but it was during a reasonable hour. So he said that he'd get the boys from school. He let them play. He didn't want them necessarily going outside. And I told him that we have a new tenant under him. We did receive a complaint, but I wanted to speak with him first to give me his feedback of the situation. Because here's what I do know. Sometimes these rental properties, the walls are paper thin, or perhaps tenants like this new young lady who had moved into the property, she doesn't have any kids. And so if she just hear the boys, it's a concern, right? And so I wanted to understand the situation. Although I wasn't there to take a side, but I wanted to get feedback before I follow up, because I wanted to know the best way to resolve the issue. So he apologized. He says, Miss Karissa, I do apologize. Please let her know that I apologize. I will make sure that the boys are not running around beyond 7 o'clock. So I went back to the other tenant. I did let her know, hey, Miss Tenant, I was able to speak to your neighbor above you to discuss your concerns, and he promised that it would not be an issue anymore. She was so happy, right? But then a few weeks later, same thing. She called me upset. She says, listen, I work at night. I'm home during the day. And the boys were out of school. I think they were on spring break or something. It was during the day. And so they were running around playing. Now, remember, I said that the father indicated that he would not allow them to run around playing after 7. So now it's during the day. He didn't know that his neighbor under him works at night and she's trying to sleep during the day. So the boys are there on spring break. They're running around playing. And now she has another complaint because they're running around playing during the day. So why am I sharing this? Because you want to understand what the situation is before taking a side so that you'll know how to resolve issues. So thank you so much for that question. So that is my response. That's the best way to handle noise complaints from other tenants. You want to acknowledge the tenant's concern. You want to address it with the other tenant, and then you come to a resolution. Okay. So one other question here: how do I avoid emotional stress when dealing with difficult tenants? Ooh, that's a good one. How to avoid emotional stress? Well, here's the thing. Some tenants and some behavior will be a trigger for a lot of people. And so the best way to avoid emotional stress is to understand what your triggers are, because sometimes that may not be something that you can avoid. But when you recognize what your triggers are, you have those conversations with the tenants. If you feel like you need to pause, if you feel like you need to take a break, if you feel like you need to get a professional in there, then definitely do it. So thank you so much for that question. All right. Thank you so much from the LinkedIn channel. Any tips for handling disputes from tenants you've discovered are fraudulent, fake information? Oh, yes, absolutely. Hopefully in your rental application, in your lease, specifically, you want to address and identify, Um, you want to address and identify any fraud that you detect or that you're made aware of. You want to make sure that it's in writing. Okay. So if it's a situation where they provided false information, hopefully and prayerfully, you have it in your application, you have it somewhere written and in writing so that you can act on it. But if you don't have those things in place and you allow a tenant to move in and they have no advance, nothing in writing to say how you're going to handle a situation over fraud, I don't know how you can legally resolve that issue because that is a legal matter. So let's say, for instance, I've had a situation, I had a gentleman on one of my lives um, some segments ago, maybe about a year or so ago. He was in law enforcement and he was sharing how a tenant fraudulently got an apartment, got another apartment at a sister property, used different names, and how they were able to resolve it. But again, because this is a legal matter, you want to make sure that you have cushion, you're going to have your proof, you're going to have that verification and documentation to address and resolve that legally, taking them to court, right? If they fraudulently got an apartment in someone else's name, and then you realize that they're not Jane Doe, they're really Sally Sue, right? You want to take them to court. Hey, this is not Jane Doe, this is really Sally Sue, and you want to provide that proof. How do you know that it's fraudulent? See, those are the things that you want to present to the court. And so it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. If you have, for instance, any mail, anything that's coming to the property in another person's name, or whatever verifiable information you can provide, you want to definitely keep that. All right. Really great question there. All right. Are there any other questions? I know that I've gone over in time and I want to bring this to a close, but I want to make sure that I'm answering as many questions while I am live. Okay. If not, I'm going to say, please come back next week right here on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for part 2. All right. I'm also going to share more personalized strategies on how to handle those tenants disputes smoothly, because I want you to understand that there is a better and a more effective way to resolve issues without stress. So let me do a quick recap here. I shared quite a bit on the front end. I talked about the most common issues, such as late rent payments, lease violations. I talked about maintenance and repair complaints. I talked about the security deposit disputes, noise complaints, and neighbor conflicts. And the best way to do it is to do it quickly so that you can avoid those legal battles, so that you can maintain those positive and healthy landlord and tenant relationships. I talked about how and why it is so important to protect that rental property business and that cash flow. It's always important to make sure that you have really clear lease agreements as well as applications. I talked about the importance of having effective tenant communication, how to check in and why you should check in on a regular basis with your tenants, making sure that you have written documentation. I talked about why you should definitely use technology to help streamline your rental property business. It helps you to stay on track. And I also talked about why it is so critically important to make sure that at every new move-in, you are conducting that pre-move-in walkthrough. You want to inspect that rental property. And then I talked about the things that we can control, why it's so important to stay professional and to stay neutral versus engaging in a heated conversation, an argument, or debate with the tenant. How important it is to listen and acknowledge when you hear a tenant's concern, because in many cases that will minimize those issues. You want to propose solutions and offer a compromise or concession, especially if you know that something has gone wrong that should not have happened, whether it's the property manager's behavior or lack of follow-up or not completing repairs timely, right? You want to know when to get a mediator involved, because in some situations, you may not be able to resolve it. And so you have to outsource it, or maybe get a legal, I'm sorry, not a legal person, but maybe just a professional mediator, someone else who can come and step in on your behalf. And you also want to always explore your legal options. Know when it is time to take a tenant to court. Know when it is time to send those letters, letting the tenant know that there's a lease violation, or maybe you're giving them a notice to vacate. And don't be afraid to enforce your lease. Treat your business like a business. If you treat your business like a business, it will pay you like a business. However, if you treat it like a hobby, well, in many cases, and it should pay you like a hobby. So that's just some of the things that we talked about today. That's a quick recap. And again, please make sure that you tune in. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please make sure that you find me at YouTube, Landlord Life. Hit that subscribe button and make sure that you are the first to know when I'm live and online. I shared a lot today. I thank you for joining me today. My time is up. I thank you for yours. So next week, again, I'm going to do part 2 of this. And I'm going to share more situations and strategies so that you'll know how to smoothly resolve issues, because it's a business. And I know that sometimes things are just not going to work out. I get it. But at the end of the day, it is a business. And if we treat it like a business, there are solutions and there are strategies available that I want you to take advantage of. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that if this was valuable, if something that I said today was helpful, please please follow me on YouTube, and please share this episode with someone else. Share it with another owner or property manager. Okay. And here's what I want you to remember: that conflicts, listen, let me just tell you, conflicts, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. But combat is optional, right? So don't think that it's the end of the day, even if you are guilty or responsible for being a little combative or having a disagreement with a tenant. But let's resolve disputes and matters with wisdom, and let us definitely do it with confidence. Is that all right? Well, thank you again so much for tuning in today. My time is up. I absolutely thank you for yours. I'm Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant coach, and I look forward to seeing you all right here, same platform, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye for now, and have an amazing week on purpose.